Franca. What's your research about?
My research is about City of Sanctuary, so that's local authorities, councils who become accredited as councils of sanctuary. And that's actually somewhat of a trend among local authorities. So it's really grown over the last few years how many councils are accredited councils of sanctuary, which means they are welcoming places for people who've newly arrived in the UK. And in my research, I'm tracing this concept of sanctuary. I'm looking at how councils mobilize it, but then I'm also interested in how people with precarious immigration status experience sanctuary, how they understand it, and also how they practice it in their lives.
How did you get interested in this research?
So it won't be a surprise to you that there's a lot of hostility towards people who have recently arrived in the UK. You know, whether it's stories in the news that portray migrants as criminals, or it's policies like even just this week, the family reunification program was ended in the UK. And that obviously then also translates in what we see on the streets, like these so-called protests outside of asylum seeker accommodation in recent weeks. And what I was interested in is, what do people do against this? What are the organizations and people that stand up for migrants' rights? And that's how I first heard about City of Sanctuary and the work that they do.
How did you go about your research?
So one thing I did is I used participant observation in 2 migrant rights groups where I'm also involved as a volunteer. And then I used creative methods that's methods that aren't only relying on verbal communication, so not only on people telling their stories. I used something called emotional mapping and also walking interviews to collect the data. And before I used those methods, I had read a lot about them, and I thought those are the best methods to use for my research. But then when I actually did the research, it wasn't as easy as I thought it was going to be, and that's something I'm talking about in the podcast.
What were some of the findings that stood out for you?
So one finding that really stood out for me and that I was kind of surprised by is that when I asked people where they experienced sanctuary, even when they told me about places like their home or charities, they usually spoke about the relationships they had to people in those places. And that's something I didn't really expect to find, that sanctuary actually is so much about relationships.
What makes you hopeful that change is possible?
I really don't think everyone thinks so badly about people coming to the UK, and actually a lot of people I think are quite happy about the diversity that we have in the UK. And also in my everyday, I can see people coming together in lots of different ways. And there's also a lot of people who are mobilizing now and becoming involved in migrant rights organizing, and that's something that makes me hopeful.
Where can we hear more about your research?
You can hear more about it in our newly launched podcast, Between Borders, which is streaming now on all different platforms.